Welcome back. We're talking about China's growing role in global diplomacy. Still with me, Wenping is a professor at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Sourabh Gupta is with the Institute for China-America Studies. Abdulateef Al-Mulhim is a Saudi journalist, and PJ Crowley is a professor at George Washington University. And let's get back to our panel. PJ, let's take a listen to how the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi characterizes China's place in the world. Let's watch.
China has devoted itself to developing and deepening partnerships with other nations over these years, and our circle of friends keeps growing. By the end of last year, China had formed partnerships of different kinds with 97 countries and international organizations, including all the major countries, neighbors, and developing countries. Partnerships have become one of the most important features and highlights of China's diplomacy.
Now, in that same speech, the Chinese foreign minister said that China does not want to lead the world. But when we look at how America now views the world under President Trump, this new America First policy, almost an inward-looking policy in America, is China going to be thrust, as reluctant as it may be, into the limelight?
Well, I think China is going to be thrust into the limelight regardless. I mean, it is a country with significant power. The question is how it uses that power, towards, what strategic end. I think the choice of partnership is very interesting. In terms of economic relationships, absolutely. You can see China's economic power in all corners of the world. By the same token, China does not necessarily have any natural friends or alliances. You have the Shanghai Agreement arrangement, but there are limits to that. And I think that the challenge for China is as you continue to grow in terms of power and influence, and on the economics realm, certainly there are opportunities for positive cooperation, win-win agreements, for example. But as you think, for example, towards the Middle East, are you drawn into zero-sum politics? And here, for example, China has been decidedly neutral in terms of the conflict in Syria, when in fact the Middle East is becoming far more sharply divided over how it views the conflict in the Middle East. So that's going to be the challenge for China. Can the kind of neutral position of non-interference, in an environment where it will be pushed, to take sides?
Abdulateef, what do you make of that? Should China now be taking sides in the Middle East? I mean, the region faces serious problems. We have problems in Syria, in Yemen, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which has been going on for decades. Is it time, do you think, would the Arab world like to see China come down on one or the other side?
China had an advantage in the Middle East, and it's very hard to talk about economics and you don't talk about politics. China became entangled in the Middle Eastern politics in a direct and an indirect way. They had, for example, they are with the Iranian nuclear deal that China was one of the signatories. That's one thing. Second thing, China is looking for big markets in the Middle East, and it's very, very hard for a country to actually be in deep economic relation with the Middle East, with the 500 million people in this region, without actually touching other areas that are not in line with each other, like, for example, the Saudi-Iranian relation, or probably the Arab-Palestine, the Arab-Israeli conflict, or the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. China in the past, they used to stay on the side, and they didn't want to interfere in politics. They all wanted to do is economy. But as time went, and there is mutual trust and more mutual understanding and more understanding between, let's say, Saudi Arabia and China, and many countries in the Middle East and China, China started to actually play a bigger part in the internal affairs of the Middle East. For example, after the start of the so-called Arab Spring, China's name came up many times in Syria, because they wanted to, they wanted to balance their position, especially that China is seeking a bigger role in the influence in the Middle East, politically, which would bring more economic, turf for them.
Sourabh, the big international outreach project of the Chinese is the One Belt, One Road initiative. 60 countries are involved, more than 60 countries are involved right now. And if you look at it more broadly, 97 countries, as the foreign minister pointed out, have some kind of a partnership with China. What does that do for China's diplomatic clout around the world?
Oh, it significantly and definitely helps China's diplomatic clout, because there's obviously a lot of money coming out from China, but there's also a lot of capital and infrastructure and expertise also coming out with that. In addition, it provides them a platform to be able to try to synergize their development strategies, their overseas development strategies, with the development strategies of the host country, or alternatively, even with the development strategies of other advanced countries which have ODA or development-related goals out there. For example, Premier Lee was in New Zealand just yesterday, I believe, and they talked about extending Belt and Road, which would obviously bring infrastructure investment to New Zealand, have New Zealand soft skills utilized in infrastructure investment in Asia, in China's neighborhood, but also in the Pacific Islands, where Australia and New Zealand have a little bit of a proprietary attitude to the Tonga and the Fijis and all. It helps to lower the kind of political competitiveness if China were to go there alone with this huge amount of money and capital and be seen, perhaps they have other ulterior motives, to work through the New Zealanders, to work through the Australians. So it allows them not just to meet economic goals, but also allows them to meet political and diplomatic goals, which, again, we talk win-win. This is exactly what win-win is about.
Right, just very quickly, Sourabh, talking about that visit by Premier Lee to Australia and New Zealand. I mean, here are two countries which are very close allies of the United States. They are firmly in the Western camp, if I could put it that way. When you look at the Chinese relationship with them, is it an either-or situation? You're either going to be with China or with the United States, or can these countries have it both ways?
Of course, in the strategic communities in these countries, particularly in Australia, it is seen to be either or to some regard, that there is a choice to be made. But going back to John Howard, the ex-prime minister in the 1990s and early 2000s, and again, Malcolm Turnbull during this very visit, he was very clear in stating that there is not a choice out here. There might become a choice if the world gets split up into economic blocs, which then take political and military connotations to it. But the whole purpose of China in Australia and these two countries, and also let's not just leave it to Australia and New Zealand, but also with Prime Minister Trudeau in Canada, the whole purpose is at this point of time when there is a certain degree of skepticism towards globalization. These are countries which have benefited enormously from globalization and are stating that they remain committed at their ends to deepening globalization. Of course, for China, the best thing that it could do to deepen globalization, frankly, is to go through the next stage of its reform process and open up its services sector and open itself up to investment. Right. So domestic economic restructuring is the best policy for China. But it's just a sign that even President Xi showed it in Davos. Let's stay open. There are many more opportunities, and the challenges that do come along with globalization can be managed.
Okay. Wenping, CGTN, our network, recently sat down with the U.S. Transportation Secretary, Elaine Chao. This is how she described relations between China and the United States. Let's watch.
The differences between China and America are there. There are cultural differences, historical differences, philosophical differences. And so increased contact and communications, I think, is helpful. Because, again, for anyone who has been to the East and West, the cultural gap and the different way of thinking really can be quite immense. And the only way to close that gap is to have more frequent contact and communications so that there can be greater understanding.
So, Wenping, the Chinese President Xi Jinping is likely to have a meeting with President Trump sometime soon. What are expectations ahead of that meeting, given that, as we just heard the Transportation Secretary say there, that there are big differences between these countries?
Oh, yes. We are looking forward to this meeting very much because, China, United States are both the leading economy and also the big country in the world. So in order to build a very good relation, I think definitely the two leaders need to meet, especially, to reach the consensus about those both concerned, those issues, both bilaterally and also regional affairs like DPRK issue and international issues. Nowadays, we just meet the Secretary of State, Mr. Tillerson, to visit Beijing. So through his visit, I think a good basis has been already established. We have heard that Mr. Tillerson has mentioned now U.S. would like to build a very good relation with China, like based on those non-conflict, non-confrontation, and mutual respect each other's core interests, and to build a new type of big powers relationship. Actually, that kind of saying has been kept, talked by President Xi Jinping in the past years when President Obama was in power. So this is the wish that China would like to build with the United States.